I hope that you all slept okay. Not really? Did you sleep well after all the exercise? Okay. So a very warm welcome to everyone to our day 2 of our Winter Living Theology with Father Carlos. And we are moving on to deeper exploration of the themes that we are continuing to explore. And let's just come into, please, very welcome. Let's just gather ourselves together in the presence of God and ask for His grace and His presence. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
Loving Father, you're the source of all things that are good. Thank you for this new day, this gift of a new day. Thank you for this opportunity that we have to get together, to explore more deeply our faith together, implications of our faith. We ask for the grace to know that you are present with us. We ask for that grace of openness to the voice of your Spirit. Help us to follow the Spirit wherever the Spirit leads us. We ask this through Christ our Lord.
Amen.
In the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Father Carlos, you're welcome.
Thank you so much, Father Grant. Good morning, everybody. How was your homework? Did you have good dreams with Mary of Magdalene and her tears? Did she visited you during the night? I hope so, because it's very important for today's talks. Her theology of tears. Of course, welcome everybody. I'm happy to share with you today in this morning 2 different talks about how the victims becoming survivors, remember, through their different ways of resistance. They help us to understand differently history from the peripheries, from the region of non-being. Remember that expression coming from Frantz Fanon. And that's why what I will be exploring today is, in the first talk, collective memory in 20th century. Because the main goal in this Winter Living Theology 2025 is to think together about healing. A healing process not only in a psychological dimension, which matters, of course, because it's like the inner experience of being overcoming trauma, but we are trying to explore a collective way of healing. And that's why in the first talk, I'll be exploring a little bit following decolonial and mimetic theory lens. You know what it's about now, mimetic theory, imitation, mimesis, mimicking the other. And then also decolonial thinking, about thinking from the peripheries, listening carefully those who live in geographical but also existential peripheries. And how can we learn from them, their wisdom, their spirituality, their strength, their way of re-existing and reinventing their lives. That's why collective memory in 20th century, from trauma to hope, is the topic of this talk. So the question, the starting point is the question of the future for all of us. Remember, we have been insisting in this perspective that we need to think about humankind as survivor. Human species, remember, facing the Anthropocene, Capitalocene crisis, climate change, but also patriarchy, colonialism, white supremacy, and so on. We need to move from a process of victimhood towards a problem or a process of surviving. And I remember I was mentioning yesterday some survivors of the nuclear catastrophes, for instance, in Japan, or in Ukraine, in Chernobyl, and how they help us to understand differently history. They live in the region of non-being as victims of a nuclear catastrophe. And that's why, we need to go back in this crucial context we are facing today. We call this civilizational crisis, because it's not only about wars in the world, pandemic, or patriarchy. It's the whole planet which is threatened by the human species. We have become, as Edgar Morin, the French great philosopher, he used to say, we are Homo sapiens et demens. right? We are rational beings, but also very violent, mad. And that's why we need to heal in this way from this deep wound as human species. That's why mimetic theory will be so important in order to understand the mechanism of violence and how can we overcome these processes of rivalry, contagion, execution of the others who are different, scapegoating processes, and then sacrifices. So we are here to try to to overcome this crisis of civilization at a global scale. Something which is different is that we need to focus clearly the questions that really matters today in this moment of Anthropocene, Capitalocene era. Not only talking about what's going on the top. Remember, we were talking about how governments, NGOs, churches, they are trying to manage the crisis we are facing. But listening in the peripheries, we are trying also to listen those who are facing in their everyday life different kinds of violence. Women facing domestic violence, undocumented immigrants facing the policy in European Union, the United States, in many countries against them because they are perceived as criminals. And so ask ourselves about the possibility of how can we imagine tomorrow for all of us. Hope is about that. Of course, Christian hope is about also eternal life as a plenitude, as an accomplishment of this life. But we need to get started here and now. And that's why it's also important to explore, map the communities who are facing different kinds of trauma. So the questions that I propose in this talk is to explore together how can we mourn those who have died, who are not anymore among us. And remember, in 20th century, different philosophers, theologians, spiritual leaders, they were asking about this. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, one of them, many survivors of the Jewish Holocaust too. We need to take in charge those who are gone, their memory, the accountability of the crimes committed against them, and a possible reconciliation with the perpetrators. That's a big question, right? Walter Benjamin, one of the great Jewish philosophers in the first half of 20th century, was exploring this, right? How can we mourn those who have died? Because, and I want to quote this, not a European great Jewish philosopher, but a healer from Colombia, an Afro-Colombian healer, who was accompanying a community facing a kind of catastrophe too. A group of more than 100 families were assassinated by the paramilitaries in Colombia, in Bojayá, Colombia, and they were looking for their relatives for years, until one day arrived when they could discover the mass grave and then taking them back home through a funeral that they prepared carefully. And the healer was not a Christian priest, was not a spiritual leader, according to the Afro-Colombian community. He said, the dead, they have a right that we haven't been honoring, the right to become ancestors through the funeral rite. Because for First Nations in the Americas, and probably here in Africa too, in many other continents, the dead are dead, but are not dead too. They are alive in a different manner. They belong to the inframundo in the Maya culture, to the different metaphors to approach that they are living in a different way. But we need to reconnect with them through the funeral rite, through rituals. And in that way, they become ancestors. And the healer from Bojayá in Colombia was saying, we are not honoring them until we will be celebrating these rituals. So how can we mourn those who have died? It's about justice, accountability, but also it's about spirituality. Let's keep in mind this. Second question, how hope can we announce to the innocent victims, the survivors who are still there? I want to quote in this, I'd like to quote in this, commenting this question, a psychotherapist in Chile who has been working for 30 years with children of tortured people and disappeared persons during the dictatorship in Chile. Elizabeth Lira, that's her name. She's one of the most important, moral authorities in Chile in this sense of healing memory, collective memory. And she says, third generation facing trauma, they cannot heal now. There are some wounds that still open. They present themselves as the grandchildren of a tortured person or a grandchildren of a missing person. And this wound stays there, remains there. Even if they have been receiving some support from the state after the dictatorship, the Chilean state was offering psychotherapy, funding for education for those children. But even there, 3 generations later, the wound's still there, open. There are no scars, there are wounds, open wounds. So what kind of hope? And hope is about bodies, memory, education, housing, all these kind of issues who are deeply related. How can we accompany the victims in order to find some hope? Let's not forget women facing all kind of domestic violence. That wound is still there for their whole life. So how can we announce hope to the innocent victims? What does tomorrow mean for the executioners too and the victims? And you know, here in South Africa, after the apartheid, you were working on a healing process, a reconciliation process, that 20 years later you perceive, that's my perception of what I've been hearing, that has failed in some way. 20 years after. Yesterday you were talking a lot, right, chatting all the time about the South African context, 20 years after the end of the apartheid. So what kind of tomorrow? And what kind of accountability for tomorrow for the executioners and the victims too? I'll be showing today and tomorrow some stories about forgiveness, including the perpetrators, which is absolutely important in any context, in South African context too, but in Colombia, for instance, I'll be showing a particular example about reconciliation process, because some years ago, 2 years ago, the Colombian Truth Commission was presenting the report led by a Jesuit, Father Francisco de Roo, who was together with a group of like 12 different leaders, moral leaders in the country, managing this Truth Commission, and then with a great team of researchers, anthropologists, political scientists, historians, psychologists, preparing this report, because Colombia needs to heal from a civil war that was there for at least 50 years. So the question of executioner, including the executioner and the victims, we'll be reflecting on that today and tomorrow as a process of healing together. And how we can, this is the spiritual dimension, how to transfigure the pain for the absence of those who we love and who are gone. So a mourning process. Every trauma creates a kind of void in the person, the community. And we need to face this in a very particular way, of course, with the help of psychotherapy, but also spirituality. They are gone. There's a void that we need in some way to heal. There's a presence absence. And this is an important experience also related to Jesus' community. That's why we will be reflecting on resurrection, in approaching to the event of the resurrection using this lens. So given this context, let's remember that what we are facing now as children of this emancipated West culture, West civilization, that the utopia is not anymore there. The utopia of modern society, of Western society, about a classless society, a just economy, a respect and universal human rights, has collapsed. has collapsed in Gaza, and before that in Ukraine. And we can explore and continue mapping the crash of the Western civilization, who was supposed to redeem humankind through science, technology, democracy, but now we're failed as humankind. So that's why, of course, there are some good elements coming from Western society and from this modern dream about the universal human rights declaration, but what we need to acknowledge is the catastrophe we are facing now. So after Berlin Wall fall, remember in '86, I guess, I remember, or 9/11 attacks, and now the war in Ukraine and Middle East. So the question is, how can we think in a positive and creative way about a future for all of us, all peoples on earth, and also all creatures on earth? Remember, we are not alone in this planet as human species. We are the gardeners of this common home, common house, and we need to take care of this. But as Leonardo Boff used to say, the great Brazilian liberation theologian, the Mother Earth is the poorest among the poor. And that's why we need to include Mother Earth as a partner in this process of resistance. Mother Earth is resisting the violence of this capitalist, extractivist economy, the Anthropocene Capitalocene crisis. So also another dimension, the last one, is about the monopoly of truth. Some people, some modern rationality, some Western democracies, they are trying to control what democracy means. If we are not part of the free world, that's the narrative of the Trump's administration today, there we are not following the right path. If we are not supporting now the military action, the war in Iran and other countries in the Middle East, supporting Israel and United States, then we are threatening the free world. For instance, this next week there is a gathering of all the American countries, the whole continent, and the US administration asked these leaders to take an option. Are you supporting us or against us? Supporting us in the war against Iran and Israel, against Gaza and so on. So the question is, the monopoly of truth is also about spirituality. Christianity is ready to engage a conversation in a different way with different spiritualities, religions, and traditions. Or we pretend to have the monopoly of revelation. Remember, that's a harsh, very difficult question, but we need to think about that. How can we engage a different relationship with religions, spiritual traditions, for instance, here the healers in Africa and their spiritual leadership? Or in my continent, in the Americas, how the First Nations, they have their own way of worshiping God. Of course, some of them, they are Christians, but not all of them. The Mapuche, remember, in Chile, I was showing yesterday, they are saying, okay, Christianity was so deeply in complicity with colonialism that we need to be careful about this colonial presence of Christian churches. And by the way, I was mentioning that the Jesuit community with the Mapuche people is trying to accompany the Mapuche people following that path in a very kenotical way, I would say. The kenosis of the Logos incarnated, right? The incarnate Logos experienced this kind of void of his divinity in order to become human and then to redeem us. So following this kind of spirituality of kenosis, I think the different communities, religious communities, Christian communities are accompanying these First Nations. So let's not forget that we are facing, when we are talking about healing, this postmodern moment we are facing today. So what is postmodernity? It's about orphanhood. As human species, particularly Western societies, has been exploring this path of being independent, autonomous. God is not anymore the last meaning of life. We need to absolutely affirm the agency of humankind. God is death. Remember this particular statement coming from Nietzsche, saying that God is not anymore meaningful in Western societies. And we call that secularization. And that has been happening for the whole 20th century in different parts of the world. God is not anymore the last meaning, the last source of meaning in society. Moral values, but also everyday life and so on. But the question is that this orphanhood experience of being alone as humankind, there's no God justifying who we are or accepting or denying our actions, our agency, it can be seen differently when we include the ancestors. We are not alone. And this is a decolonial perspective, criticizing deeply the modern narrative about autonomy. Remember, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I exist, or the translation, historical translation, I conquest, therefore I exist. The question is how the ancestors they are living, whom we are barely know, and love with sorrow and joy always intermingling. So as children of late modernity, that's our identity now, we need to rediscover the connection with the others. We are not alone in life, because the ancestors are there, Mother Earth is there. And that's why we need to reconvert in some way, to reshift our imagination, but taking seriously the experience of vulnerability. Remember, we are not anymore like this, following the utopia of this modern subjectivity taking control of the world through science, technology, and everything, but we have been realizing that we are vulnerable. Individuals, communities, and as a human species. We are deeply affected by the other. And that's what vulnerability is about. Vulnerability is not being weak. It's being affected by the other, acknowledging this process of being affected. So that's why, and remember, we have been trying to explore. I like this mapping because we are reversing the south and the north. South Africa is here. Oh. Okay, well, the anti-systemic thinking, we call this her story, listening carefully to the feminists, saying history is a very masculine word, her story is also important. So we will be reflecting today, trying to listen not only the cry of the victims, but their imagination. How they reimagine the world, living differently, creating something new. I'll be showing you two video clips, one related to disabled people and how they recreate through choreography. You like arts as me, I do. Another example of queer communities who are also claiming that their bodies are holy, are beautiful. Reimagining their own lives, facing, in that case, gender phobia, which is any kind of phobia against queer communities, right? So they are connected, deeply connected, the two experiences, disabled people and queer people, because they're living in the shadows, remember, in the region of non-being, and they're claiming their dignity, their joy of living, and their also commitment with the community in order to become part of the community. So we're trying to follow in this path, the anti-systemic thinking, because we are trying to think how can we change the world from below and from the other side of the world, the region of the non-being. This is an important consideration preparing the two video clips we'll be watching today. So we're talking about victims, the voices of the victims from below, the voices of the collapse, nuclear catastrophe, patriarchy, extractivist economies, racism, and so on. The ableism is another hegemonical narrative. Only the able people with abilities, they are controlling the world, spaces. Well, here at the Jesuit Institute, you have place for disabled people, right? You have some particular ways in order to welcome people. And there is a pastoral ministry also in South Africa with deaf, right? The Dominicans are involved there, right? So please, let's talk about what the Dominicans are doing too. Okay, well, I know there's a lot of text. I'm just commenting the main ideas. This is an interesting quotation of two authors, a Swiss architect and a historian from Iran, Mahid Rahmena. The two of them, they have been working for decades trying to listen the poor, the people in the peripheries. And I like the last paragraph in this quotation. What the colonial thinking is trying to do is to reshape our minds in order to think not only from the top of the world, from above, but from below and from the peripheries. It is rather a matter of listening to them, the poor, of opening oneself to them, of understanding their language, of loving them, and trusting in their power as poor people. So that one day, perhaps, the peoples to come may finally rediscover the happy freedom of choosing poverty. You know, they are in some way dismantling the utopia of free market and wealthy societies. Because this is a possibility for 1% of humanity, or if we include middle class, probably 30% of humankind. But many people, they cannot afford this way of living. Right? So we need to reimagine our connection with the victims of the poor or the, any kind of victims differently. Learning from them, acknowledging that they have a power, I don't like power, potencia, in order to reshape our imagination. Jean-Pierre Dupuy, remember I was mentioning this economist from France. He is also is a scholar in the US. He proposed to think about this catastrophe of the world economy, but listening the victims of the nuclear catastrophes. And his book was published in 2004, Pour un catastrophisme illustré. How can we translate this, Father Grant? You're a French speaker. We need to think about the catastrophe in a critical way, listening to the victims of nuclear catastrophes. And he was, in this catastrophe, enlightened by reason. How can we think about the urgency of thinking as survivors? And Jean-Pierre Dupuy, he has been exploring this. You can find some of his books, and then this is another author, Marshall Maritain, Chernobyl. The questions followed by Jean-Pierre Dupuy, sorry, are this. What happens to the economics of scarcity in such circumstances? How is the social fabric of the survivors reconstituted? What justice is realized for the victims, and what happens to the executioners? What model of society emerges from such social trauma? So those questions, they are closely connected to what Ivan Illich was also asking at that time, and René Girard, the mimetic theory author, because we need to reshape not only our imagination, but also our thinking. And that's why, well, the concept of systemic victims raised, particularly I'm quoting here a great intellectual in Mexico, in southern Mexico, Raimundo Sanchez. He's the director of an interesting popular university called Unitierra, the University of the Earth, in Chiapas, southern Mexico. And what he's trying to follow up is accompanying the Zapatista communities, the Maya communities, who in 1994, they started an insurrection in using some arms, a very basic army, but trying to fight for their own lives, territories, culture, religion, way of living, way of governance. And now they, after 30 years, they continue controlling their own territory, their own land in southern Mexico. So it's an important social movement who in some way help us in Latin America to realize the a live presence of the First Nations. In my country, Mexico, there are 10 million indigenous people who are not only there, like in the peripheries of the world, but trying to engage a process of transformation, including their territories, their spiritualities, and so on. So that's why we need to improve a kind of conversion. And conversion is not only about spiritual behavior or training. Conversion is also about minds, imagination, and ways of living. They created, for instance, a project welcoming those who are from outside called the Escuelita Zapatista, the little school of the Zapatista communities. Zapatista because of Emiliano Zapata, a great indigenous leader in the Mexican Revolution a century ago. And the Escuelita Zapatista is a process of relearning to learn. Living with the communities, farming with the communities, sharing the everyday life with them for a couple of months at least, and then trying to engage a new process of understanding life. Also singing, dancing together, worshiping together. So it's an interesting project. And that's why this experience of the survivors matters, because they represent like a call for all of us, the call to empathize with them, with what I call here, following a great Italian philosopher, Giorgio Agamben, weak subjectivities. Weak not because they are threatened all the time or affected by the world, but because they have been transforming their wounds into a strength, a kind of force. So the question is that, Giorgio Agamben, this is The King and the Glory, this is the Spanish version, but this is an English one, about the question that modernity has replaced God and put in his place or her place economy. Instead of glory of God is the power of the state. And this is the idolatry that modernity has been improving at least for 2 centuries, since the Industrial Enlightenment and then the Industrial Revolution. So the question is that we need to, in some way, go far away from this onto-theology, because this economy is like a new god, is an idol. And that's the word onto-theology. Theology has been captured in some way by this understanding of economy, state, according to Western patterns. And God has been expelled from society. So this is the theological background of what we are discussing here. So anti-systemic thinking, and postmodern thinking too, they try to approach God's revelation in a different manner. God is, of course, accompanying the communities to resist, to reinvent themselves, to face violence, and to heal together, including the perpetrators, according to this Jewish and Christian narrative. Remember, the forgiveness for the enemy. The forgiveness for the enemy is not only about a moral behavior, it's also a spiritual and political process. How can we include the perpetrators in the process of healing? And that's why, let me quote this great text by Derrida. He published this book, Hora. Hora is the symbol of nothingness. In Plato's work, a great Greek philosopher, but also in modern and contemporary philosophy and theology. You know, Christian theology has been all the time, since the beginning of theologians in early Christianity, thinking about God as nothingness. God is like a void. It's not a being, an emperor controlling the world. It's the source of being, which is different. And our brother, Thomas Aquinas, I like to quote Aquinas as my brother Aquinas. I used to say, I remember one professor in Fribourg, when he was lecturing, he used to say, the Holy Spirit, Aquinas, I myself, we think that. Professor O'Neill from Ireland, a great systematic theologian. So, well, here the Holy Spirit, I hope, is also supporting us. But, well, Aquinas used to say, we know about God more that God is not, than what about God is. So we need to be very careful about our positive language about God, because it's close to idolatry. And to keep all the time our minds, our hearts aware about that God is the source of everything, but it's not a thing. It's not an object. I cannot take control on God. So that's why we call this apophatic theology. A negative. Apophatic means in Greek negative. A negative way to approach God. And another great Dominican, our brothers Jesuits, I'm quoting today many Dominicans, Meister Eckhart used to follow that path of apophatic theology. Apophatic means a negative approach to God. God is not a being, is the source of being. It's nothingness. And that's why Buddhist philosophers and theologians now they are revisiting Meister Eckhart, because it's close to a Buddhist perspective about like a void in life. I like very much a quotation of Meister Eckhart. He used to say, talking about hell, if hell exists, there is only one inhabitant, the self. We need to experience a process of emptiness in order to call God to become in us. That's why his statements were a little bit scandalous for his time, but he was never rejected officially by the church. And that's why, well, we are following in some way this, and Derrida is talking about this chora, or the nothingness. It's a philosophical idea, but related to the Christian idea of kenosis in these terms. A place of resistance of the survivors, or the victims. This absolute heterogeneity to philosophy and to the Judeo-Christian history of revelation. A condition of possibility that makes history possible by resisting it. What the hora is of nothingness, this void, it's also the place of the non-gift that makes the gift possible by resisting it. It is the place of non-desire. The hora does not desire anything, nor does it offer anything. The hora does not happen, does not give, does not desire. It is an absolutely indifferent spacing. And Derrida, this great French philosopher last century, was exploring this in a philosophical manner, but all the time listening theologians from this perspective of apophatic theology. So we need to think about God, but also about us as human beings, experiencing this process of emptiness, of our own desire. Tomorrow we'll be reflecting, the last day, on mimetic desire. If we want to overcome rivalry and violence, we need to stop desiring, controlling the goods and the commodities of the others. This is another spiritual experience. It's not only about knowledge or political resistance. Gandhi's experience of non-violence in some way is a great example of this stepping back from the violence against the enemy. If we just react against the enemy, fighting against him, her, we're reproducing the same system. That's why it's absolutely important to stop the violence. I like very much that quotation of St. Paul in the letter to the Ephesians, chapter 3, verses 14. I think I'm not, there's a biblical scholar in the room, so, or 2:14. Well, anyways, Christ dismantled in his own body the process of hate, of rivalry. And that's very important, because it's the only way to create space, void, in order to give birth to a new world. We'll be going back to that idea of messianic existence tomorrow. Well, and the long quotation is this about Derrida, sur le don, about the gift. For Derrida, this void is important because the victims in resistance, they are inhabiting this void. And this is the opportunity to create something new. That's why it matters, this idea. I know it's a little bit abstract, but I think it's important just to keep in mind. So the question is, the spiritual and political question is that we need to refuse idols today. Idolatry. There are so many beings, objects, that are replacing God in our lives. And one of them today is this Christian and Jewish Zionism. Controlling land on behalf of God, expelling the Palestinian people and many others in the Middle East because a promise of God for that one people. This is an idol. This is not the God of love. And that's why we need to reconnect this reflection of how the survivors, they are experiencing in their own bodies and territories and minds this kind of settler colonialism, and how they resist. And let's then get reconnected to the mystery of the real, the mystery of love, the loving mystery of the real. I like that expression coming from David Tracy, a great US theologian in Chicago. So we need to take really to promote a kind of criticism to any kind of idolatries. And then to rediscover the survivors' experiences as counter-cultural, counter-political, and counter-moral powers that are in some way deeply related to the divine revelation. So God in some way is raising with the victims and the survivors, imagining a new world. This is the spiritual depth of the survivors' experience. And because I know this is like a very abstract narrative, let me show you the narrative of a disabled scholar in London, Professor Thomas Shakespeare, who reflects on his own experience of being in the shadows, being a disabled people who was not allowed to become a professor, for instance, or an intellectual, or a human being with all human rights respected. And how is the way he is reimagining himself? It's not only about claiming justice, and that's fine, it's important, it's this first step. But Professor Shakespeare will help us to understand that there's something more that disabled communities are doing.
Chemical process. It's a social process, and it changes. So Giddens says, a person's identity is not to be found in behavior, nor, important though this is, in the reaction of others, but in the capacity to keep a particular narrative going. Really interesting stuff, some years old now. And because sociology, and Giddens was the sort of most famous sociologist of his day, is a form of storytelling. Ken Plummer is a sociologist who uses the concept of story to explore the ways that people understand and represent their sexual experience. He wrote a famous book called Telling Sexual Stories. So lesbians and gays coming out. There is a coming out narrative. People who've experienced abuse. There is a survivor narrative. Trans people now have narratives of that journey that they went on. And disabled people have those narratives. So you know the work of Irving Goffman, another person who's as famous among psychologists as sociologists. And in Stigma, a fantastic book, still relevant 50 years on, people who are socially excluded by virtue of physical impairment, mental impairment, sexuality, lots of other differences, have a sense of spoiled identity. He talks about them being discredited because their difference is well known, or they are discreditable because their difference is hidden and they want to manage information to prevent it coming out. And so there is this stigma which might either be enacted, the way people treat them, or it might be felt in the sense that they internalize that shame or anxiety. So we talk about self-stigma. And we're still, you know, earlier this morning, you were using these words stigma. We're still using those words. We might want to use the words discrimination or cultural attitude. What in the feminist movement was called consciousness raising, which leads to anger about the way you've been treated, resentment at being put down, and hopefully political action. And now last year we were 100 years on from the suffragettes, the suffragists, and that was exactly what they were about, was we're fed up with this. We demand the right to vote. We are equal citizens. And
ongoing process of coming out narratives. That's the key concept. Disability studies has been exploring for like 40 years now, or more, even more, in the UK and then also in the United States. I don't know, in South Africa, is there an important group of disability studies? I don't know. In Latin America, it's a very, very poor production of disability studies. But what I realized living in the US is the importance of this theory, this approach, because it's deeply connected to other coming out narratives. Queer narratives, poor narratives, immigrant narratives, and so on. So coming out from where? From the region of non-being. And this Professor Shakespeare was starting talking about queer persons, and then engaging the conversation about disability and disabled people coming out from the shadows in order to reinvent themselves. And there is a spiritual dimension of this process, of this coming out, which is related to the nothingness of God. God is supporting those who are in the shadows in order, as a known being in some way, in order to promote their visibility. Not only their visibility, but also their dignity, their beauty, their joy of life, and then their human rights, of course, and their contribution to the whole community. So that's why these first reflections coming from Professor Shakespeare, they matter in my understanding. So the question of hope, that's the third element I want to explore here. I have how much time? 4 more minutes, oh my gosh. It's about the question of tomorrow, the possibility of transforming history, but not from the top of the world, not coming from the privileged society, but from those who live in the peripheries. I like this, like it's a kind of poem. One of the authors of the Maya communities who were like controlling their own territories after 94 last century, talking about imagination. I see it's a little, somebody can read for me, please, a volunteer. It's like an invitation to imagine differently who we are. Somebody can help me. I know it's very little, the size of the... Please, yeah. Right here, now imagine.
Now imagine that you have no fear, or that you do have fear, but you control it. Imagine that you go and in front of the mirror, not only you do not hide or make up your differences, but you emphasize it. Imagine that you make of your being different a shield and a weapon. You defend yourself. You find others like you. You organize yourself. You resist, you fight. And without even realizing it, you go from I am different to we are different. Imagine that you do not hide behind maturity and good sense. Behind, it is not the time. There are no conditions. We must wait. It is useless. There is no remedy. Imagine not selling out, not giving in, not giving up. Could you imagine it? Well, even if neither we nor you know it yet, We are part of a bigger we, yet to be built.
We are part of a bigger we. When we emphasize our differences, that's paradoxical. But that's the way the survivors, they recreate their lives facing trauma. Highlighting the difference and the community of difference. That's a little bizarre, sounds bizarre, but at the same time is the coming out narrative that we are talking about. And because of time, because I want to engage a good conversation with the audience today, let me just connect with other narratives about this coming out. It's a combination of different trends of the indigenous people, the undocumented immigrants, women, queer communities, and so on. So this is what we call the discolonial and anti-systemic thinking, affirming the communitarian character of the world, the thinking, and then looking for the wisdom and the spirituality of, we call in Latin America, the good living, el buen vivir. El buen vivir is a way of resisting different and re-existing together, taking into account and welcoming those who are different in our communities, our families, our communities, our churches. But sometimes we need to be challenged by this experience of otherness. Those who are different, many times we feel like threatened. Differences about ideology, about skin color, about spirituality and religion, about social class, and so on. And that's why, some authors like Juan Mariátegui, a great Peruvian sociologist, he used to call the bien vivir, or buen vivir, is an historical realization. And in some way implies social practices oriented to democratic production or the reproduction of a democratic society, but as an alternative to the global coloniality of power, modernity, Eurocenteredness. Bien vivir or buen vivir, good living today, can only make sense as an alternative social existence, as a decoloniality of power. Together with another great Peruvian author, Aníbal Quijano, Mariátegui, are the two sources of this decolonial thinking. We need, why decoloniality? Because we are not just reproducing the same system. That's about post-colonial studies. Post-colonial studies in Asia particularly, but probably here in Africa too in 19th century were born, saying, well, now we are in charge of democracies. We as First Nations in Asia or Africa, and we'll be rediscovering what modernity is about, but by our own forces and strength. The post-colonial is about that, but reproducing, mimicking the same Western pattern. And that's why decolonial is a different perspective. No, this model has collapsed because it has been imposing a particular rationality to the rest of the world. That's why we need to reinvent politics, economy, even religion. And that's why decoloniality matters, because we are dismantling this system of oppression. And another element is that what the victims, they do to heal together is creating networks. I was mentioning yesterday the mothers of the missing persons. In my country, in Mexico, 120,000 missing persons in the last 20 years. And their families are looking for their children because the state is not. Looking for them in mass graves, looking for them in prostitution houses or in farms controlled by the criminal mafias where they are enslaved, mainly young men. So the families, they are creating networks among them in order to look for their children, to find them, to get, opening a way back home, also performing rituals in a spiritual sense in order to get reconnected to them as ancestors, and then also asking for accountability. But it's not the priority. The priority is giving them back the opportunity to come back to home. So the question is how a network of networks is creating a new imagination. And that's why different churches are also involved in these processes. We need to reimagine as Christian communities, how can we get connected to those survivors everywhere where we are located? In any context, there are different kinds of survivors. And that's why Christian communities, we could be reconnected to them. I'll be presenting now a video from a queer community in France. They are African descendants in France who it's a video that could be challenging for some of you because they're playing in the beach, a performance talking about, the lyrics is a poem, it's a beautiful poem. Of course, the dances and so on could be a little bit challenging, but I think it matters because it's deeply connected to other coming out stories and narratives, the disabled communities, and many other people who have been living in the shadows of society because they're different. Remember? About difference. So let's watch this video. If you don't like it, just close your eyes. If you like it, you can dance too if you want. But look at the lyrics particularly. Okay, let's go. Here we go. Nowness.
I will drink you with my eyes.
Okay, this is a different story, but a similar narrative of coming out narrative of people who are living in the shadows and they discover that their lives matter. It's not only about racism, it's also about a kind of gender violence, right? And they are deeply connected, the two narratives, and many others. We could explore how the people, the victims, the survivors, they are facing different kinds of trauma. Femicide is a trauma, of course, domestic violence, gender violence. But we don't used to talk too much about this in Christian communities because we think that is gender ideology. According to the extreme right narrative in the US, this is gender ideology, that is a part of the communist threat towards free world. There's only two genders, right? Well, humankind has been aware about the diversity of human gender since the beginning of history, right?
You, Trump.
Yes, your friend Trump. Okay, well, what I want to just end reflecting on, we'll be reflecting in the second talk today, this morning, about dreams as a form of knowledge. These communities are dreaming something new. Remember Martin Luther King Jr., I have a dream. Dreaming is important. And that's why dreams matter, because they are probably not a very Western way of thinking. Thinking is about clear ideas, right? Following Descartes, René Descartes. Thinking is about concepts and then argumentation. And, well, First Nations, they have a different way of knowing, where dreams, they have an important role. And in dreams, people, they are aware about what's going on in the community and so on. So it's a mode of personal and collective knowledge, an essential role in the common decision making. Let me end by a story. Some years ago, like 20 years ago probably, I was attending a conference on indigenous theology in Chiapas and then Guatemala. We were about like 1,000 persons, mainly indigenous people, who were there. And the main goal of this conference was to respond to a particular question. Why the children of in the community and the youth, they don't want to follow anymore the tradition of the indigenous communities. They want to wear differently in a Western manner. They don't want to speak the language. They want just to mimic Western influencers, like one of our friends here. So the community was wounded because of this. Their identity was in some way disappearing. And so we were gathered together for a week. And during 3 days, we were preparing to dream together. Reading some biblical stories about dreams, but also some Maya stories about dreams. In the Popol Vuh, which is the sacred book of the Maya people, there are also stories about dreams. So we were like working in different workshops, different groups, during the day, 2 days, talking about that. There were some speakers, they were talking about the importance of dreaming together, dreaming personally and then dreaming together. Some of them there were approaching the Western way of understanding dreams, for instance, the psychoanalytical way, talking about dreams. They are like revealing our unconscious powers, fighting in our unconsciousness and so on. But there were the other anthropologists who were like exploring different manners, the importance of dreams. And then one of the important healers in the community, a Maya leader, Tina Lopez-Bach, who was for a while an advisor of the Bishops' Conference in Guatemala, not as a theologian, but as a healer. And she was leading the process of preparation for dreaming together. And then she was like helping us to understand and to reread the dreams in our own lives. We were preparing that way for 2 days, and then we were sent to dream during the night, and then to tell the stories of our dreams the day after. It was very interesting because there were common trends in the dreams we were sharing. And the community was looking for some responses to the question that was raised in the beginning. How can we include the youth in the process of living tradition, indigenous living tradition? And then there were agreements. Well, we need to respect, for instance, new ways of becoming indigenous people. There are some conditions that we need to keep alive, like speaking our language and practicing some rituals. And the rest is up to us, up to the youth, to create new identities as indigenous community. So they were in some way welcoming, through different metaphors, stories, and rituals, this new generation. The importance of dreaming together in Maya communities is absolutely important. I know in other First Nations traditions it's also an important issue, right? So we don't used to talk about our dreams, sometimes in confession. What kind of dreams we had, right? Dangerous dreams. But dreams are a different way to connect with our memory, our ancestors, and that's why dreams matter. We'll be trying to reconnect this story of dream to Mary of Magdalene, her tears, and then how the Christian community was mourning the loss of their master, their friend, Jesus of Nazareth. For now, I think that's okay. It is enough time because we are preparing also a break. And with Father Grant, we'll be engaging in a conversation. Thank you.
As a dancer, it's definitely like a worst fear to be told you're never going to walk again. But dance isn't about being able to stand up. Dance is about, from the inside out, expressing yourself. I could move with my body. It was just different to what I used to do. My name is Mark Brew, and I'm the Artistic Director of Access Dance Company. Access Dance Company is a physically integrated dance company made up of dancers with and without physical disabilities. It's about that combination of disabled and non-disabled dancers and the unique, wonderful things that they do together.
Start just playing with these gestures.
In the dance world, we say translation. For example, if I have a choreographer who's showing me a movement and they're a non-disabled dancer, they're standing up, how do I translate what they're doing to my body?
And so let's look at your translations.
Once I'm given a movement, I take it and I look at what she's doing with her body, the feeling she's trying to portray. And then I take that and I put it into how do I make my chair feel things.
And shift through like there's something pulling you. Start to take your chest up towards the sky.
DeMarco, for me, is just so grounded and humble. He is an artist that the dancers trust completely.
Dancing and giving myself over is very freeing and natural. I grew up in foster care, and I got to a point where not having things wasn't a problem anymore. It became like a level of being free. There's a moment where the audience first sees a group that is consisted of dancers with wheelchairs, and for a brief time, that's all they see. And they wonder how they're gonna dance, how is this gonna happen, you know? And then once they start to go on the journey with you, people say the chair disappears.
One day after performance, I had a young child that came up to me, had a disability, who was also using a wheelchair, who said to me, I always wanted to dance, and I didn't think it was possible. But after seeing you, I now know I can.
For this first lecture of the day, you emphasize a lot on yesterday about listening to the victims. You really have taken us very more deeply into what listening means and to what it invites us to do, and that emptying process, emptying ourselves, and that can be challenging. I think the process of emptying, the process of listening, really listening, deep listening. Do you have any questions or comments? Clear points of clarity you'd like to explore with Father Carlos? It seems for Evangelii Gaudium, I was very touched when you were, one of the quotations there was listening to the poor, spending time with the poor, making a space for the poor in our engagements, in our encounters. Encountering the poor was something that Pope Francis was deeply passionate about. And in Evangelii Gaudium, seeing Christ in the poor and making space in our lives for them. It seems like if we expand our definition of the poor, not just economically poor, but poor in all sorts of different other ways, I think we're moving towards what you're talking about in our daily life. What do you think? Do you think there's space? Do we think we create enough space in our lives to listen, to draw close, to encounter?
You know, some years ago, like 50 years ago, when liberation theology was born in Peru, in Latin America, the option for the poor was like the main criterion to really be good disciples of Christ, right? Following Vatican II, we were like listening carefully the signs of the time, and the signs of the time were mainly focusing on justice, poverty, and this kind of social exclusion. And that was a very creative reception of Vatican II. But 60 years later, I think we need to move forward, including and expanding this concept of the poor to any kind of victim of different kinds of violence, exclusion. And that's why I pretend my contribution in this conversation is to connect decoloniality, queer theory, disability studies, because they are thinking critically about those other subjectivities who are also victims, but at the same time survivors, and they are reshaping the world from their perspectives too. So that's why rooted in Vatican II, liberation theology, we're moving towards a more, I would say, inclusive way of talking about this option for the poor.
I think that option for the poor, and that expanded definition of what that means is very important for us. How does this was there a question? No?
A comment, a question, whatever is.
This is an opportunity for our engagement. Yeah.
Thank you and good morning.
Good morning.
I'm sitting here thinking from yesterday and today that a lot of us in this room do a lot of work, in the communities that we come from. And I think a lot of the times we go in to help, but we already go in with a toolkit. This is what you need. But a lot of the time we actually haven't listened to the people that we're trying to help. What do you need? It all comes from a good space, but we always think, oh, you need housing, or you need a retreat, but we haven't actually done the work of listening to the people that we're helping. And I think this whole workshop so far for me is giving me the how to, how do you help with listening? How do you heal yourself through listening to yourself as a victim. You know, we're all victims of something or another. The people that we work with are victims of some alienation or another. How do we work with those people, but making sure that we also listen to them whilst we try to help? So it's been just a thought that keeps running in my mind. So thank you so much so far.
And that's the core of this talk. We need to really reshape our imagination, listening carefully, those who are the victims, but also they are survivors, creating something new from their wounds. And that's the process of, in some way, deeply related to the resurrection process, right? But we'll be reflecting on that later, but that's exactly what I was trying to communicate. Thank you for this feedback.
So in my work in human rights, we speak about a human rights-based approach. And a human rights-based approach, when we work with people, is it's not going in with answers or ready-made solutions. Human rights-based approach is helping people to understand that they have their own dignity and that they can advocate for their dignity. And the human rights-based approach is giving them tools, not that we come in as saviors to bring them, to lift them up, but that we give them tools so that they can lift themselves up. And that's an important part of a dignified approach to support, to social support. And I remember also this has radical implications for ministry, of course. I was challenged when I was studying theology. I was challenged when I got all excited about bringing Christ to others. So someone pushed me on this and was like, well, hang on. The Christ is there already. What you're doing is you're meeting him there. And that you are encouraging others to notice his presence already there. And this fits in very well with an Ignatian point of view, because, you know, Ignatius understood that Christ was someone who is at work already in the world, and we are invited to join in with what he is doing. So what you're encouraging us to do from an Ignatian point of view is you're trying to help us to understand that Christ is present in places we would find surprising. Christ is present in places of brokenness. Christ is present in places on the peripheries. And I think that's really, really, really important. So I suppose the question for us is, are we open enough to meet Christ in surprising places?
Finding God in all things, but in all places, in all subjectivities, in all bodies.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly, and I suppose for us that means we have to sometimes expand our view of God,
of course,
expand our definition of God, and maybe that's an emptying process. You were very, very, that was very deep reflection on the apophatic way. Maybe discovering God in the peripheries is more of a letting go of images that we have built up to make space for surprising ones.
And you know, when we do this, I think we transform our way of thinking, of living, and also of thinking, for instance, as theologians. Last Monday, I was visiting the University of Pretoria, I told you, and I was very surprised by the kind of theology they're doing at the center. It's called that Center for Faith and Community. And yesterday there was an important inaugural address by Professor Stefan de Beer. He is a professor of practical theology, and the topic is amazing because this center is working with houseless people, unhoused people, trying to create new houses, facilities, but also rebuilding the connections, the networks among themselves. And the topic is doing theology in African cities, transdisciplinary solidarities, gesturing liberations, and local co-constructions. It's about practical theology. How can we accompany houseless people? Not only giving them retreats and then welcoming them for a particular worship, which is fine. It is not enough. How the communities themselves of houseless people, they connect each other, and what's the role of universities, architects, theologians, historians, journalists, artists, accompanying them, not anymore helping them. I think we need to transform that language.
And this is a powerful point of your lecture. This idea of this the crisis, the modern crisis, is loneliness. Because we have artificially separated ourselves into our individualism without realizing that we are all connected in very, very deep ways. So then the process you speak of recreating communities is recreating networks, and that's we need to expand the definition of we, of us, of community. And that would actually solve the problem of loneliness, of modern loneliness. We entrap us, we're orphans, right? That was very, very, very powerful. To actually, and you mentioned that yesterday as well. You know, you mentioned the car, right? You gave the image of the car. I don't think we had enough time to fully explore that image. I think you mentioned that the car, our cities are built around this idea of a car to make space for cars. And why would we need to make space for cars? Cars speed things up, right? We can get from A to B quicker in a car, supposedly. You spent how long yesterday in traffic?
2 hours.
Really? Oh my gosh.
Just getting home was a long journey, right? So this idea of the modern tools, the modern tools are meant to help us to be quicker. They end up making us slower.
I actually said to my driver in between, I think I go out and walk next to the car.
So this is interesting. And just on the question of loneliness, this is meant to connect, right? It's meant to connect us with other people. And social media is meant to connect us with other people. We could validly ask the question: is that true? Are we actually connecting with others using these tools? They're good tools, but you sometimes see two people at a coffee shop sitting together, WhatsApping other people, but they're together, but they're not really together. They're at other places. So I suppose that's quite interesting. That I suppose is compounding the problem of loneliness, but also what the invitation, the hope perhaps, is that we can create communities that are broader and realize our connections with others, realize our connections with people. And that has a whole implication for liturgies, trying to create spaces for differences in our liturgies. Suddenly liturgies, that's an exciting idea, isn't it? If we could create spaces, liturgical spaces of meaning for not just a very select group of people, but for a broad group of people. That's exciting. Oh.
Comments here.
Can I ask someone with a mic to?
Yeah. She's also. Yeah, the mic is coming. Microphone. First, yes, she asks first.
Of course.
My question mainly was about coming out. And I have lived with a few people, and especially one, and I was the one who approached the subject and said, well, I think we should be honest with each other and all this. And there was a fight then among us, but eventually we made up, and I could accept her as she was, and she accepted me, but I was prepared to accept her and still be her friend. Now, for the past 10 or 20 years, I've been with people and worked with people who they keep lying to me, and this is my friend, and so, yeah. So I I'm in a quandary at times, and I say, this person is my friend. Should I actually say, you know, what I feel? And because I know that they are homosexual, and well, I'm heterosexual, and that person is homosexual, doesn't matter, it doesn't matter at all. But there's always that kind of lie there, and I find it difficult at times. Could you say something about that?
Well, the coming out stories, as I mentioned, is about gender, but it's also about many other identities, right? Like disabled people. We were listening about that. But focusing on gender issues, of course, I know this is a very challenging topic in different countries, particularly probably here in Africa. The bishops' conferences in Africa, they have been rejecting Pope Francis' openness to welcoming, blessing same-sex couples, right? So I know there's an issue here, but I think we're moving towards a more critical way to approach gender identity, of course, related to Western, affirmative actions of queer people. Not only homosexuals. Queer now is like a big umbrella to include all different kinds of gender identities. Heterosexual, homosexual, lesbian people, gay people, transgender people, bisexual people. So humankind has been experiencing sexual diversity since the beginning of history. So we need to, we have some tools in order to name this reality and to welcome this diversity as a gift of God. But also now, probably, we are listening to other cultures. Since for centuries, they have been also welcoming gender fluidity, for instance. Yesterday, we were watching a video of a young Lakota guy who was dancing, remember the choreography about gender fluidity? So First Nations, they have also a different wisdom to understand this diversity. And I think it's important in order to go beyond this very Western way of addressing stereotyping lives, right? That's why queer is a general term, a concept, including all kind of gender fluidity. Some people, they can express their own sexual identity in particular terms, as a lesbian, as a gay, or as a trans person, but at the same time, suddenly they can have a commitment with other people, and then feel in love with other people and create some community. So gender is about fluidity. It's not only about particular stereotypes, and that's why we need, I think, to open our minds, our hearts to this rich experience of gender. And of course, the moral horizon, the ethical horizon is about love and responsibility and commitment with the other, right? Mm-hmm. So it's about how queer people, as any other human being, we are called to be committed to the other, to be engaged with the other, creating communities of life, of respect, inclusion, and welcoming life. So I think this is the way we need to reshape our imagination, also listening in those communities. This is my perspective.
So I was touched by your question, because I could feel that you were trying to reach out. You were trying to create a space for others to feel free, and you were anxious that they felt comfortable enough to be open with you. I think in your question, and just listening to this morning's talk, we are invited to consider the systems of oppression that still hold people back, and that people still feel so vulnerable or afraid to share. And maybe the invitation for us is to realize that we have a lot of work to do to create spaces for people, to recognize the pain and the hurt that causes, the systems cause, and it's maybe that for us we can just feel the weight of that on some of our people that we engage with, encounter. But your reaching out is a beautiful thing, to try and create that space, but also to know that we have that work to do.
And in my understanding, there are initiatives here in South Africa of ministering these communities. So I think the possibilities are there. There are other people connecting, also trying to reconnect with queer communities and queer people. And I think about the poem we read, we need to acknowledge our difference and then to get connected to the other. And there are some other people who are facing probably similar questions, who are also facing similar experiences, and then they're exploring new ways of creating friendship, communities, families, and so on, churches.
It is a bit difficult in the black communities.
Mm-hmm.
Because parents of some, they'll just chase them from the house.
Mm-hmm. I know.
Had that experience.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for giving the opportunity and for this lecture. For me, something that is outstanding is on the prophetic theology. I love to take that in a way of from yesterday, decolonizing Christianity, and how that is going to help us into making sure that those that are living in the shadow of the community, like the queer and the disabled, especially the queer, using this theology to address how to decolonize Christianity, because we have been raised in a system where we are told it's either A or it's B. Once you go in the C direction, you are now being told it doesn't work. And you're already being raised, being told that you need to live this way. Once you don't live in that way, you are going out of the order. So to us, as long as we bring that God is not a being, God is the source of being, then we can start to deconstruct what is in our minds, what have been taught. Then with that is going to help us to accommodate and embrace everyone into the community.
What a beautiful power summary of this lecture. Thank you.
That's a beautiful reflection, and just on that apophatic aspect of what you're inviting us to, I was thinking of Richard Rohr, a good author and thinker, of course. Some nodding. I loved what he has to say about the Spirit, because when we think of theology as a very particular Western idea, we have clear concepts. Everything is contained. God is contained within these clear concepts, and we know what the Spirit's about. And we direct the Spirit. We say to the Spirit, go here and go there, and the Spirit goes there, right. This understanding. But Richard Rohr says no. The Spirit does what it wants. The Spirit is, there's a freedom to the Spirit, and part of our growth as people of faith is to recognize the Spirit, to recognize its wildness. And then we grow closer to this idea of God outside the box that we put him in, to allow God to operate outside that box, and to allow the Spirit to be a little bit more wild than we had initially anticipated. So maybe that's an exciting invitation.
It is.
To let the Spirit do what it needs to do, or what it wants to do.
I think.
To go back to what you earlier said, you are bringing Christ to the people, is already there. I mean, God is the originator of the earth, but God also allows the earth to carry him. See the burning bush with Moses, at least. And so everywhere we actually go, no matter into which situation, even in a disco or anywhere we wouldn't think of it, God, this is holy ground. So wherever we step, it is holy ground. And the people that are there is God already there. Only we must discover him.
and help the people to discover him, that he is there, because he's not always showing himself with a burning bush. He's invisibly there, but he is in every place. This is holy ground, as Elizabeth of the Trinity stresses, and everywhere he is. So if I think of the post office, I walked the other day at the post office, and I was thinking, this is holy ground. What? Post office? Never thought of it in my life as holy ground. And then I just said in my heart a prayer for these people who serve in the post office. But it's, if we can develop this attitude, this is holy ground, God is here. And then discovering him with the people, or with the situation, or with the one person we are having, or whatever. But it's very, very difficult to develop that habit. Because they're so busy. I'm so busy, and so many thoughts here in my head, and during the day, totally forgotten.
So, go ahead.
I love very much this biblical symbol, of course, a burning bush, because it reminds me something that is related to apophatic experience. We are called as Moses to take off our sandals. And that's a process of emptiness, right? In order our feet, they can touch the ground. And this intimate connection between feet and the holy place, the holy ground, is relevant, because this is the spiritual experience of embodiment, where the spirit is alive in us, right? So this kind of connection. I love very much the image of the feet.
I don't know if it's true, but Leo should have said to his bishops, you must walk barefoot.
Okay, great.
Thank you very much for that comment. Thank you, Father Carlos. We are well into our tea time. Can I suggest that you grab some tea and some nourishment, Father Carlos? 20 minutes as well.
It's okay.
Can you do 20 minutes? Is that okay? Is that fine? Meet us back here at
Thank you. Okay.